What's up everybody, Venom here with a quick guide on a great build for a rogue in Diablo 4. Let's get right into it. Now, first of all, building a rogue is pretty straightforward, but it can get a bit confusing when you get to the higher levels, so if you want a build that's not only insanely powerful, but that specializes in traps and AoE abilities, then this is going to be the build for you. To start, you're going to want to put just 1 point into Puncture, which is that first ability in your tree, and then once you level up again, 1 point into Enhanced Puncture, and 1 into Fundamental Puncture. Now, Puncture is going to be the first ability that you learn. It generates 1 combo point, it has a lucky hit chance of 35%, and what it does is it throws blades a short distance which deal 21% damage, and every third cast of Puncture will cast a slow on the enemies, and it'll slow them for about 20% for 2 seconds. Now, critical strikes that you get with Puncture will always slow your enemy. When using Enhanced Puncture, after you get that skill up, you will gain 2 energy every time Puncture damages a crowd-controlled enemy. What is a crowd-controlled enemy? Well, that's an enemy that's slowed, dazed, something like that. Something that stops it from moving or stops it from moving as quickly. Fundamental Puncture will throw 3 blades in a spread instead of just a fan, and dealing 35% of its base damage. Hitting an enemy with at least 2 of the blades at once makes them vulnerable for 2 seconds, and vulnerability becomes very important later on. Next thing you're going to want to do is put 5 points into Rapid Fire. Now, Rapid Fire is easily one of my favorite abilities other than the traps, but we will get into that later. Rapid Fire fires 5 arrows, which each deal 30% damage. And if you have combo points, which are generated through Puncture, it will increase the damage and the amount of arrows that are fired. Now, it does cost 25 energy, so make sure that you're conserving your energy and being careful as you use this ability. But let's get into the combo points. So if you have 1 combo point, it will do 33% damage and fire 6 arrows at once. If you have 2 combo points, it will do 36.75% damage and fire 7 arrows. And lastly, at 3 combo points, it will do 42% damage and fire 8 arrows at once, which is devastating to enemies that stand in front of you. You will also want to put 1 point into Enhanced Rapid Fire. Now, this is because each subsequent arrow that's fired with Rapid Fire will have a 5% increased critical strike chance, up to 40% for that 8th arrow that's fired. That means that with the 3 combo points and using Rapid Fire, you will have a 40% chance to get a critical strike. Next is Improved Rapid Fire. Now, Improved Rapid Fire will give you 15 energy per cast of Rapid Fire if it damages a vulnerable enemy. Now, as we remember, Puncture now creates vulnerable enemies, so this becomes extremely important because you always want that extra boost of energy so that you can keep casting Rapid Fire, as it is a very strong core skill. Now, this ability, Rapid Fire, has to be aimed at an enemy. You can fire it in just any random direction at any time. I've done it a million times by accident. So make sure that when you're using Rapid Fire, you are still pointing and facing at an enemy, just so that you can make sure you get a critical shot on that enemy and not out into the ether at trees. Dash is the next ability that you're going to want to put 1 point into. Now, this is an agility ability, and it has 2 charges, which is nice, but you want to be sure to maintain those charges. Try not to use them both immediately in case things get dicey during a fight, and you want to use dash to get away from enemies rather than trample through them. Now, it has a lucky hit chance of 25%, and dashing forward will slash enemies in front of you and deal 32% damage. This is a physical damage ability as well, just like your Puncture, but I will say that I didn't really focus too much on using dash during fights other than to dash in, drop a trap, and dash out. But it is still very helpful when you're doing things solo to be able to dash in, do some damage, and dash away before you get obliterated. Enhanced Dash is going to be your next point, which will make damaged enemies by dash take 15% increased critical strike damage over the next 5 seconds. It's kind of helpful because it gives that extra boost of damage. It's not something that I think is vital because I don't use dash all too often, but it is a good place to put a point if you would like to use dash in your rotation. Lastly is going to be Disciplined Dash. Now, dash now slows enemies that it hits by 30% for 3 seconds, and if an enemy is already slowed, like by Puncture, let's say, it'll be dazed for 2 seconds instead, which is kind of a nice tool to have to keep them from attacking you if you need to get away quickly. Now, this is nice when you're attacking a bunch of enemies at once because it gives you an opportunity to create a gap between you and those mobs, just in case things get a little hectic. Now, the next tree is where all of the magic happens, and my absolute favorite part of this build, traps. Now you're going to want to put the first 5 points that you have available into Poison Trap. Poison Trap is a game changer and I use it 24/7. It is down as much as humanly possible, and here's why. It will damage enemies by 344.16% poison damage over 9 seconds as long as the enemies stand in that radius. So again, it is kind of worth noting that the enemies will need to remain in that area of effect from the trap in order to take the damage, but that's not too difficult to maintain. Another thing worth noting is that you can have up to 4 traps out at once. Now, sometimes it's not very helpful because you have so many enemies attacking you and things coming at you one by one, so it's difficult to be able to get all 4 out before pulling a mob. But if you're at a boss fight and there's a cutscene, this is the perfect opportunity to drop as many traps as you can under that boss's feet before that cutscene ends. It gives you the upper hand once the boss comes out. Poof! They're in your trap, and as long as you keep them in those traps, they're going to have massive amounts of health taken from their health pool. It's very helpful. It helps to get that damage in pretty much right from Jump Street and not having to worry about trying to lay them down once the fight has begun. Now next is Enhanced Poison Trap. So now Poison Trap will knock down enemies for 1.5 seconds once it activates. This is also extremely helpful and has gotten me out of some sticky situations several times because I will put a trap down and it knocks them down and I can run away and take a health potion before I get my face kicked in by 210 skeletons that I shouldn't have aggroed all at once. Regardless, that knockdown for 1.5 seconds comes in handy. And lastly, in this Poison Trap tree, you're going to have Subverting Poison Trap. So this deals 10% increased poison damage to enemies that are standing inside of your Poison Trap. So again, very important to keep them inside of the trap. I know that might seem like, oh, how am I going to do that? They're always running around. Well, if you stand in one place, or at least attempt to, they will also stand in one place. Now, some builds are going to tell you to go for concealment, and I'm going to say no. I don't use concealment, enhanced stealth, or subverting stealth at all. I skipped them completely and went back and put my points into Puncture. Now I'm going to explain why. When you're using concealment, yes, you become unstoppable, but the second that you use an attack, it breaks your concealment. Now for some people, that's not too bad, but for me, I don't want to stop attacking and I want to be in on the action and constantly trying to kill things before they kill me. With that being said, I just don't use concealment for the sheer fact that I'm always moving and grooving and bouncing and jumping around. So my recommendation is with these next points, put them all into Puncture. I use Puncture 24/7, click, 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 click. That's my main ability. So I recommend going back up to the top of your tree and putting the points that you would put into Concealment, Enhanced Stealth, and Subverting Health, so 3 points, back into Puncture. Next up, we have Exploit. Now, Exploit is extremely awesome because it does 6% increased damage to healthy and injured enemies alike. That means whether they are at full health or whether they are injured, you're going to do increased damage for every single point that you put into Exploit. So make sure that you have 3 points in Exploit to really get the most out of that talent. Next up is Malice. Now, Malice will deal 3% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. If you remember earlier, I said vulnerability will come in handy later. When using Puncture, because you have fundamental Puncture, you will make enemies vulnerable. So having Malice ties hand in hand with using Puncture. And since Puncture is your main ability, you're going to be using it quite often. So your enemies are going to become vulnerable all the time. And with Malice, and having 3 points in it, you will do increased damage to those enemies that you made vulnerable thanks to your ability. Next comes Agile, which you're going to put 3 points into. And what it does is when you use a cooldown, it increases your dodge chance by 4% for 3 seconds with 3 points in it. Now, this comes in handy sometimes for survivability, so when you use something like your Poison Trap, or if you're using Dash and you use it twice and it triggers that cooldown, it's going to boost your dodge chance by 4% for those 3 seconds, which can just give you that little upper hand that you might need to survive in a fight. Next, again, Deadly Venom. So what this does is it increases your poison damage by 3%, and you're going to want to put all the points that you can in it, which is 3. This is going to increase your poison trap damage by 3. And I love this because, again, those poison traps are already overpowered, and it just gives it that extra oomph that you need to kill a bunch of enemies at one time that are standing in that trap. Now to your ultimate skill. How exciting. Of course, we're going to go with Death Trap because this is a trap build, and it does come with a hefty cooldown of 50 seconds, but let me tell you why this is crucial. When you place that trap down, it does take 1.25 seconds, just like your Poison Trap, to arm itself. but once it's activated and an enemy moves within that range, it's going to deal a total of 250% damage to any enemy within that area. And when you put skills into those next abilities that come with Death Trap, it's gonna get even better. Starting with Prime Death Trap. Prime Death Trap makes it to where enemies are pulled into your Death Trap once it activates. So after that wait time of 1.25 seconds, it's going to yank enemies around it into your trap, which is phenomenal because you're going to have a bunch of AoE damage to enemies that might have just been a little bit out of the range, and now they're pulled in and they are sucked in for all that damage. Next comes Supreme Death Trap, which, if Death Trap kills an enemy, its cooldown is reduced by 10 whole seconds. This is an awesome little boost to that cooldown because, man, 50 seconds feels like forever. So if Death Trap happens to slay an enemy that walks within its path or that is yanked within its path, you will have the cooldown reduced by 10 whole seconds and you'll be able to use it sooner to kill more enemies. Next up, I skip over and go to Trap Mastery. So when your Poison Trap or Death Trap activates, you're going to gain 4% increased critical strike chance against vulnerable and crowd-controlled enemies for 4 seconds. Again, this is going to need 3 points in it in order to make the most of it, but I feel like this is crucial to your trap build. Because you're using Puncture, which has the chance to make enemies vulnerable, and you also have Dash, which can crowd control your enemies, this really gives you an upper hand for that critical strike to get those big hits on those big enemies. Now, for your remaining points, we're going to go to Debilitating Toxins. You're going to need 3 points in Debilitating Toxins because poisoned enemies are going to deal 5% less damage because of this renown. It's insane the amount of survivability, damage reduction, and damage that you can put out with this build. That's why it's easily my favorite build in the game. But Debilitating Toxins is a must-have if you really want to make the most of not only your poisons, but keeping those enemies from doing as much damage as they normally would. Next comes Adrenaline Rush, which, while moving, you're going to gain 5% increased energy regeneration. This is also super important because you're constantly moving and you always need energy. As a rogue, you want to be moving all the time. So this is pretty crucial, and you only need to put 1 point in it, but I definitely think that that extra little boost of energy, since we're always dashing and running and jumping and trying to get away from enemies all the time anyway, I feel like this just gives you a little boost. Next comes Haste. And while you are above or at 50% maximum energy, you're going to gain 5% increased movement speed. Now that's pretty awesome because if you stay above that 50%, you're going to move faster, and Adrenaline Rush, of course, as long as you're moving, you're going to be gaining energy. So they kind of go hand in hand. And if you're below 50% maximum energy, you're going to gain 5% increased attack speed. So if you just so happen to use your rapid fire just a few too many times and you drop below that 50% max energy, then you're going to have 5% increased attack speed, which makes you faster. Everybody wants a little upper hand when attacking a bunch of enemies at once. And lastly, we have Stutter Step. Now, when you critically strike an enemy, this will grant 5% movement speed for 4 seconds. Since we have a lot of these renown points in things that give us a little boost of extra critical strike, this just makes it so we can move a bit faster and increase our survivability while attacking either a big boss and needing to dash in and out, get away quickly. It gives us a little boost in that survivability by being able to get away quickly if we have to. So that's going to do it. I hope you liked this video and I hope you learned something from it. If you like this build and you try it out, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, like the video. If you like my content in general, subscribe to my channel. I hope that this build was at least a little bit helpful to beginners as well as veteran players. I think that trying out new builds and learning what you like and what you don't is one of the best parts of Diablo. So thank you so much for tuning in. Bye!